Okay, so I see our final panelist has joined us. So we will go ahead and get started. Welcome again to the Mulberry Knoll Road Extension Planning and Environmental Linkages Study. I am Jennifer Sinelli Miller, Project Manager for DelDOT Regional Systems Planning. We are joined with our consultant team from WRA, which includes Kim Glinken and Caleb Parks, and with our principal planner from DelDOT Regional Systems Planning, Sarah Coakley, all of whom will be able to join you later to do part of this presentation. And next slide. So we are going to discuss the purpose of this workshop. We're going to provide you with the project overview, basically explaining what a planning and environmental linkages, also known as a PELL study, is. We're going to show you the project location, and Sarah's going to talk to you a little bit about what the Transportation Improvement District is. The PELL study is also going to cover what the purpose and need are, the environmental inventory we've identified, the screening criteria that we've used. We're going to have Todd Oliver from WRA also discuss a typical road section, and we're going to show you some initial concepts and compare those initial concepts. And I just want to stop right here and just make sure everybody's aware that we are in a very preliminary planning stage at this point. We are only doing kind of the initial groundwork to kind of move this to the NEPA process, which is the National Environmental Policy Act process. We are required to obtain approval for our projects that are federally funded. So this is, again, nothing has been determined or finalized or approved at this stage. This is very initial concepts. And then we will talk to you about next steps. Next slide. So the purpose of the workshop is to discuss the need of the study, show the proposed study area that we identified. We're going to share the initial concepts again, and then at the end, we will obtain comments and feedback from you all on the concepts. For those of you that are joining us virtually, you will be able to use the Q&A box in Zoom. For those of you joining us on the phone, we will have an option for you to raise your hand so we can unmute you to provide comment. We will also provide you with an email address and a mailing address should you want to provide your comments and feedback in a text format. Next slide. So what is a PELL study? The planning and environmental linkages, also known as PELL studies, are kind of early collaborative transportation planning, which considers impacts and benefits for our future transportation improvements. The information developed is then integrated into the environmental review, which I identified as the NEPA process, so that future funding can be identified. The goals of the Mulberry Knoll Extension PELL study. So just making sure that everybody is aware, this study was identified as a priority from the 5 points working group recommendations. It was also identified as a needed additional segment in the Henlopen Transportation Improvement District. And secondly, we wanted to identify and preserve a defined corridor for the future project implementation. Just so everybody's aware, this study area is encompassing about 4.3 square miles, includes a mix of suburban residential developments with farm fields and open space interspersed. And we have some of that are environmentally sensitive areas around Love Creek and Gossley Creek and their tributaries. This area has been experiencing a very high growth rate, higher than others in Sussex County and across the state. And based on forecasts from the Delaware Population Consortium, we expect this type of growth is going to continue, and it will continue to impact traffic and remain a challenge for our residents already in this area. And finally, the goal of Mulberry Knoll Extension's PELL study was to inform regional development transportation priorities in advance of funding becoming available and having design and construction move forward. Next slide. So this is the project location or the study location that we identified. We wanted to make sure, again, that we were west of SR1 and Plantation Road, but that we were looking at ways to connect SR24 to US 9. So this was the area that we used for the study. As you can see, there are 4 locations of developments that have occurred within the past 3 to 5 years. This is kind of indicative of the growth that will continue within this area and why the study became so important to us. I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah Coakley, our principal planner, to explain the TID. As some of you know, the Henlopen TID agreement was signed between DelDOT and Sussex County last year, and she's going to be able to provide you more information on that.
Good evening. Thank you, Jen. My name is Sarah Coakley, and I'm a principal planner in our regional systems planning section, and I manage all of the transportation improvement districts in Delaware. And so a transportation improvement district is a specific geographic area that's identified for the purposes of more easily making transportation improvements within that area. And so basically it replaces the need for a traffic impact study where the future development comes in consistent with a parcel specific land use forecast that's done by the local government. And so basically it is it creates a transportation based impact fee to more equitably distribute the costs of the needed transportation improvements to the developers within the TID. So as an example, the map on the upper right corner there is the future land use forecast for the Henlopen Transportation Improvement District. And so the yellow parcel lines are those expected to be developed as residential units. And the numbers there are the number of single family dwelling units expected. Then the red are non-residential parcels. And then the purple are mixed use, expected to contain both residential units and future non-residential square footage. And so based on the future land use forecast, then DelDOT and the county worked together and identified needed improvements within the district. And so we projected future traffic level service on all the roadways and intersections within the TID, and then identified the recommendations, then also the costs of the recommendations, and then a fee schedule for future development to contribute towards the cost of the improvements. And so the second map on the lower right corner is showing the new connections that were recommended through the Henlopen TID study in yellow. And it includes extending Mulberry Knoll Road, basically an extension from where it ends now at Cedar Grove, and then ending across from the vineyards on Route 9. And the line there was just basically to show like the beginning and end points. And so this, as Jen said, the PELL study, one of the purposes is to try to determine more specific concepts for where the new connection could actually be built. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Kim Clinkin. I'm with the firm Whitman, Breckbart & Associates. We're working with DelDOT to help them develop this project or this concept. As Jen mentioned, the goal of this PELL study is to identify a conceptual alignment to be used for the TID program. We're also laying the groundwork for the NEPA document. Should the project enter NEPA? So first we developed the purpose and need for the study, which much of it is based upon the findings of the Henlopen TID study. The purpose that we identified is to identify transportation improvements that would, number one, reduce congestion for local and regional traffic and increase system linkages. And number two, improve access for designated development areas to support economic vitality and sustained growth. Next, we identified a smaller inventory area shown in the yellow boundary, where a future connection between Route 9 and Cedar Grove could likely be implemented. Since we are between existing densely developed areas, we have densely developed areas on the east and additional developed areas as well as natural areas to the west. Within this yellow identified area, we delineated wetlands and streams, and then mapped out the flood zones, natural areas. All of those are shown in various shades of blue and green on the map. And then we identified agricultural lands that are within the preservation program. They're shown in pink, and historic properties. Those were identified by the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs, DHCA. They're shown as yellow dots on the map that were on their database. And then we also have red dots on the map that were recommended eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. We also reviewed census data, and we have not identified any block groups with high percentages of low income or high minority populations. We then developed screening criteria for the concepts. We use the identified purpose and need, as well as the environmental inventory, to inform the development of the alternatives for evaluation. We use a two-step process to narrow down the concepts that we would evaluate further. Step one identifies whether the concept would meet the identified needs of the project, which effectively any new roadway within the identified corridor would likely address the needs. Then we look to step two to consider environmental resources. Our effort was focused on encouraging development of concepts that minimize the number of displacements of residential properties, minimize the impacts to natural resources and historic properties, and then we figure in cost of the project. And then we developed a typical section of what each concept would look like. They're based on the standards set forth by AASHTO. The typical section is shown at the bottom of the screen. It includes two 11-foot lanes with 5-foot shoulders. The 5-foot shoulders could also accommodate advanced bicycle users. And then we also have a 10-foot shared use path for pedestrians and bicycle users. We then laid out several concepts within the identified inventory area with the goal of meeting the identified screening criteria, and then compared how each concept met the criteria. 3 concepts that minimize the impacts were carried forward, and I'll be showing them now. Okay, all 3 concepts are a little over 2 miles in length, and they run south to north from US 9 to Cedar Grove Road. On these graphics, east is at the top of the screen. So this is east and this is west. And all of the concepts have roundabouts at the 2 new intersections at Cedar Grove Road and Robinsonville Road. So here and here. And then signalized intersections at Beaver Dam Road and US 9. The features that we tried to minimize impact to include the agricultural preservation area here, and the Norwood-Jackson historic boundary, which is the historic boundary is shown in green. And then we have the Gossley Creek stream that we were trying to minimize impacts to. For concept A, we tried to stay along the south edge of the inventory area, avoiding impacts to the cross property, which is shown here, and minimizing impacts to the agricultural property. We do end up passing along the southern edge of the Norwood-Jackson property through here. Concept B is similar to concept A, but we eliminated some of the curves to provide longer tangent sections. This concept does run closer to the cross property, but it does avoid direct impacts to the residential property. We do this concept runs along the edge, the western edge of the agricultural property, and also crosses through the southern portion of the historic complex. For concept C, we explored an alternative that runs along the eastern edge of the inventory. Although it avoids impacts to the cross property, it bisects the agricultural property, and it bisects the Norwood-Jackson complex, cutting across the driveway that connects the complex to the road that accesses the property. So this table summarizes the potential impacts associated with each concept. Concept A is a little longer in length, and it also impacts a few more properties. Concept B impacts more forest land and potentially requires the most area from the Norwood-Jackson complex. And concept C has higher wetland impacts, which would also impact the agricultural property and would bisect the driveway to the Norwood-Jackson property. cutting across it from BJ Lane, which is the current access point. So this may have greater historic impacts to this concept would cause greater historic impacts. Jen, I'll pass this back to you now.
Thanks so much, Kim. So our next steps is to incorporate community feedback into the concepts where it's feasible. So we would take all of the information you provide us. If one of the concepts does not get any comments, then we just don't submit that. But we are hoping you all provide us with as much feedback and as many comments as you can based on the initial concepts. We're going to identify identification of recommended concept based on the public feedback, and then we will complete the PELL study early next year with just a wrap up and a final report out to the public. So we are on to the public comment period for this workshop, and this is how you will submit your questions. If you'd like to submit a question and you're on virtually, you are more than welcome to use our Q&A box. We will either answer you live, or if it's something technical related, as we received early on, Caleb is able to kind of address some of the technical questions. You can also, if you are on the phone, you may press *9 to raise your hand, and we will call on you and ask you to unmute, or we will unmute you so you can make that public comment to us. If we could just jump to the next slide so that people who want to submit a written comment can see, you will be able to email our public relations office. They will send them directly to us for consideration for this study. And you can also submit it via mail at DelDOT Community Relations, Potential Regional Systems Planning, PO Box 778 in Dover, Delaware, 19903. So I think we're ready to start. So the first one is from, I believe, Finkless. So after the connection from 24 to 9 is completed, what happens to the additional traffic that then goes to 5 points? So I don't know that that's very clear for me. I understand that if you're saying if they would come up and on Route 9, make a right-hand turn and enter the 5 points intersection, we will have many projects happening in this area. We kind of talked about that a little bit last night at the 5 Points Transportation Study Working Group meeting. We did a massive presentation in regards to the 5 Points intersection itself, and how we are trying to develop projects that are going to mitigate impacts for us actually doing something at that intersection. So we have a number of projects coming online the next couple of years that Todd is hopefully able to help me speak to. One of which is you will see on the map, the Plantation Road Phase 1 will be coming online to help traffic move around the area. We will also have the Minos Conway grade separated intersection coming online. I believe 2023 is when that's supposed to start and run for 2.5 years. We also are working on the realignment of Old Orchard Road on the other side of Route 1. So again, many projects are coming into this area in the next 2 to 5 years. So we're hoping that once all of those have been completed, we're able to reassess the travel patterns and how everyone is navigating through this area.
Jen, if I may add a couple
Sure.
points. As it relates to the traffic at 5 points, I wouldn't necessarily consider the traffic potentially using a Mulberry Knoll extension as new traffic. It's basically redistribution of traffic that's likely already destined to and through 5 points, and also provide that local connection, which is probably just as critical for local access to travel north-south west of Plantation Road, so that some of those local trips that originate west of Plantation and west of Route 1 can travel north and south more efficiently, rather than trying to travel along Plantation and possibly through the 5 points intersection to get to Point West.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Jen,
So I'm sorry.
Maybe before we get into some of the more technical questions, I guess there's a few questions popping up. So just sort of, if we could talk through logistics a little bit. A number of folks have questions related to the materials that we presented today, and just to confirm that those will be available on the website following this presentation.
Absolutely. They've already been provided to our IT department to post to the website. If we could get, oh, there it is, the website link. If you go to del.gov and click on the projects, there's an orange cone that says projects on there. It takes you to a list. And if you click on studies, it'll list all of the studies that are currently active, and Mulberry Knoll is there. So if you can't type the URL, you are able to access it through the Del.project portal, right from Del.gov website. And Caleb, what, so.
We have a couple more, thanks Jen for clarifying the logistical items, a couple more questions, I guess, related to traffic. I guess Mr. Breyer asks if that we've seen plans for 4 lanes on Plantation Road, and was wondering if Del.dot can plan for 4 lanes on Mulberry Knoll from Route 9 to Route 24. Maybe we want to show the typical section again.
So Todd, could you speak a little bit to the 4 lane on Plantation?
Yes, so one of the issues that we've encountered in studying the next phase of Plantation Road is whether it needs to be a 2-lane section, a 3-lane section, or a 4-lane section. One of the goals of developing these concepts for a 2-lane Mulberry Knoll connection is to help alleviate some of that pressure on traffic congestion along Plantation and eliminate that potential need for a 4-lane section, because as you mentioned, a lot of development has occurred along Plantation over the last several years, and the associated residential impacts and property impacts of widening to a full 4-lane section through the entire length of Plantation would be rather significant, to say the least. So both from an impact to residents, but also a cost to the department to purchase all of that right away and relocate those residents. So the intent here is that rather than dealing with the major impacts associated with the 4-lane section on Plantation, provide some north-south relief with another 2-lane roadway along Mulberry Knoll. At this point, the concepts are developed to represent what would be needed in terms of right-of-way for a 2-lane roadway. If the department were to proceed with the NEPA document and study for this concept, or for one of these concepts, or a preferred alternative, that would have to be defined through the NEPA process, meaning the associated impacts and limit of disturbance would have to be for an ultimate 4-lane section if that were considered. At this point, it's my understanding the department is not considering a 4-lane section for Mulberry Knoll.
That is correct. We are not at this time.
Just along the lines of, I guess, the traffic technical side, and there's a number of questions related to a traffic impact study and whether or not that would be done. And that there's a couple other similarly related questions as far as if you're dumping traffic onto Mulberry Knoll Road, would there be other improvements on existing Mulberry Knoll Road?
So as developments are coming in, they are, I believe, and I saw Sarah come off mute, so I'm glad she did. They are either contributing to, or they will be contributing a fee to the Henlopen TID to make those improvements. And Sarah, could you want to clarify a little more?
Sure, exactly. Yep. So, so Mulberry Knoll Road, the existing road, is also identified for improvements, realigning the curves, especially southeast of Route 24. And then also intersection improvements at all of the intersections, either turn lanes and traffic signals or roundabouts. And which option is done at the intersections will be determined based on public input once those locations are in our CTP, our capital transportation program. But yeah, so we recognize that the additional roadway is going to need improvements as well, in addition to the new connection being made.
And one of the
Hey,
things I
Kate.
do want to, oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Jennifer. Caleb, getting back to the previous question about a broader county-wide study, it may be helpful to go back to the TID slide just to show the footprint of what was studied as part of the TID, which is significant, albeit not entire county-wide, but a large area to encompass the impacts associated with those developments. So the TID was a very comprehensive effort to capture some of those county wide impacts associated with all that development. So I didn't want to brush over the fact that the TID was a rather large area.
It is, Todd, thank you. And we are doing, and just so everyone knows, this is not my only study in Sussex County. I am involved in multiple studies right now that are, one of which is Coastal Quarters, that is studying how traffic moves across the county from Maryland's expanded 404. So stay tuned. And you all, I want it to be very clear that you all will have additional opportunities to participate as things move forward. This is just, again, very preliminary kind of jumping off point for everyone. So we're committed to working together to move this forward.
I guess one more traffic related question that may be worth discussing at this point. The question here is, given the growth in our area, does the committee study team believe that a 2-lane road would be sufficient? What impact does this have on the Plantation Road widening? I guess I think we kind of touched on that a little bit, but maybe if we could further explain the typical section that we're assuming here.
Sure. So I guess just to give some reference and context for phase 1 of Plantation Road, that is actually transitioning through those improvements to a 3-lane section. So we'll have a 4-lane section through a realigned portion on the northern end, and then there will be 2 lanes southbound and 1 lane northbound extending down to Robinsonville Road. So we do have a 3-lane section proposed as part of phase 1. The idea related to the 2-lane Mulberry Knoll section is that we would alleviate some of that congestion that's experienced today on Plantation by providing that additional north-south connection west of Plantation Road. So we at this point, we don't know exactly what phase 2 of Plantation Road is going to look like, but I would say that a 4-lane section along Plantation would likely not be needed if the Mulberry Knoll extension is provided, even at a 2-lane typical section.
Thanks, Todd. Switching gears a little bit, we have another question related to environmental justice communities. This question asks, what's the definition of an affected impact to these communities? It was mentioned that we don't anticipate any environmental justice communities to be affected, but one option appears to pass somewhat closely to Jimtown.
So if I could, hi, Mr. Weller, that is correct. And so Jimtown and Belltown as a whole were considered an environmental justice community that could be impacted. We were definitely aware of those concerns and those kind of constraints. The Norwood Jackson property being a part of kind of that area, which is a federally protected or federal registered property. So yeah, we are very well aware of that. We're not trying to kind of ignore the what's on the ground. But I'm not sure if that, and Kim can maybe speak more a little bit to the specifics that are required for the actual meeting that level.
Right, we look at the census data, and unfortunately the smallest boundary for census data is the block group where we can get information. And so that's rather large. So since there's such a mix of residences, we're not able to drill down and identify specific communities. So it's really good that we do have different ways besides just census data. So when I spoke about EJ communities, it's just census data and how the percentages of minority and low income families compare to the county average. But we can use other data as well that Jen mentioned to help clarify that there are communities that we do want to protect.
Kim, could you bring up one of the concepts, maybe concept A?
Sure.
And I guess it's one of the things that we look at relative to the alignments and the concepts is the limit of construction associated with those concepts. So as illustrated in the typical section, we basically have an estimated or assumed width for that limit of construction until we get into more detailed design. So if you look at concept A, for example, if the alignment itself is not necessarily going through the adjacent parcels or properties on Jimtown, we wouldn't consider that necessarily a direct impact. The direct impact in this case is where we're actually going through the Norwood Jackson complex as it pertains to historical and cultural resources and impacts for that. So, I think that's one thing we want to stress here is, the lines that you see on the screen are conceptual and have to make some assumptions related to impact, and it's really direct impact at this point that we're primarily concerned with. We haven't evaluated anything related to indirect impacts. So, direct impacts to environmental justice is the primary issue that we are referring to at this point. Is that correct, Kim?
Yes, you said that very well. Thank you.
There are a couple questions related to zoning and land use. I guess a question from Gosling Creek asks what zoning restrictions would be applied to this extension. Will land use guidelines maintain the property in a non-mixed use designation? There's a couple other questions about, could you speak on the connections and impact to existing houses and farmland adjacent to these corridors?
Yep. Hi. So I can answer a couple of those questions. So regarding the question about zoning restrictions, so the Henlopen TID analysis modeled the future land use plan from Sussex County. And so that as development comes in, if it comes in different than what was modeled and is expected to generate more traffic, then they're going to have to do a traffic impact study. So it doesn't function as a zoning restriction, but basically development that comes in, it has to be consistent with that future land use plan in order for them to pay their TID fee and then build. Otherwise, we would want them to reevaluate what is needed in the area. So most of the, other than right around 24, most of the lots are designated for single family residential. So if they came in with, mixed use that's going to generate more trips, they would need to study and probably identify additional improvements that may be needed. And then for the other yellow lines on that map on the lower right hand corner, so basically the goal there is for if those parcels were to be developed, we would want additional access internal to those developments to connect them to the state roads, rather than them having multiple access points along plantations and Mulberry Knoll Road, or even along Cedar Grove Road. So we want them to basically consolidate entrances and have their own access instead of having multiple access points along the state roads. So that's what those are for. They're not necessarily going to be in those locations, but that's what the purpose and goal of those are.
We have another, I guess, land use related question here from Judy Rose Siebert, asking about the Ag Preservation District. Is this the Freeman Farm where the corn man grows corn?
Yes, that is.
Go ahead, Jen.
I'm sorry. Yes, that is Mr. Freeman's farm. We have spoken with him, and he is aware and hopefully participating on this call. If Kim wanted to add something to that in regards to Ag Pres, she's welcome to.
Right, we've just identified. So the owner of the farm has put the farm as an Ag Preservation District. So there are certain safeguards for that, which is why we did try to avoid impacting that property specifically.
And any impacts to that type of environmental area is handled during the full NEPA process. So again, we are not even there yet. So that's why that has not been raised to the level that it will be raised.
Thanks, Jen. I think that sort of relates to another question that came up. Does this approved road have to go through the federal government approval first? Maybe you kind of just answered that.
Yes, absolutely. It has to go still through the NEPA process, right? we are required to have a federal approval for any federally funded road that is put in our CTP. And this road project has been added to the FY23 CTP strictly because we are in need of making sure that if developments are coming into this area from this point forward, we are able to work with them on how this is going to be done and ensuring that their fee is utilized to help develop this project going forward.
We also have a few questions, I guess, related to the design. The first one here is, what are we doing at the proposed connection at Route 24?
So that's actually another project. I believe the intersection of Mulberry Knoll and Route 24 is being handled by our Route 24 project. The first of which was, I believe, Mulberry Knoll to Route 1. Todd, I'm not sure if you were part of that or not, but that should be nearing completion as far as construction goes, and then it'll go from Mulberry Knoll to the Love Creek Bridge. So that's the second phase of that project, and I believe that intersection will be improved within that project. I can try and find the project link and put it in the Q&A for everybody.
Thanks, Jen. And there's also a question about the typical section again. I guess how we came up with the width. Do we need such a wide road? 92 feet is a lot of space to take up.
So Todd, are you able to?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I apologize.
That's okay.
So what's shown here conceptually doesn't include additional grading and accommodations that need to be made for surface drainage. So in most cases, for what we call open section or the roadside ditches that you typically see on roads without curb, we would need to provide a depth that's adequate to convey that flow from the certain magnitude storm or design storm. So in most cases, we would be looking at a 10-year rainfall event probability to develop those flows and then provide a typical section for the ditch associated with it. So likely be a flat bottom ditch, probably 2 feet wide at its base, maybe up to 15 feet wide at the top of the ditch. So those are not shown here conceptually, but that's also part of the additional disturbance or limit of disturbance that's shown.
Thank you, Todd. And we have a few questions related to the schedule. One asking, when does DelDOT estimate the project work will begin? I see another one asking about the time frame for completion, and this individual also asks what the estimated cost of the project is.
So as far as the work on the project beginning, again, we still have to have federal NEPA approval for any project to move forward. We did, again, program it within the CTP. I need to look back at my notes for the cost estimates that we were given, but it's programmed in a 5-year CTP, which begins in 2023. So that means that project is probably programmed for design to begin in either 27 or 28. We usually put those into our what we call our out years. So you aren't going to be seeing probably anything in regards to even design to start prior to 2027. Again, it's very hard. It's such a preliminary step right now. We wanted to again get behind this, behind the development that's coming in fast, almost fast and furious, and at a higher rate, as I said, than anywhere else in the county and anywhere else in the state. To make sure that we have one of the biggest complaints we hear from the public, from you all, is that the infrastructure isn't there when the development shows up. So we're trying to kind of be ahead of the game in this situation by doing some of the preliminary work to get our environmental studies group a little further along that NEPA approval process. So I hope that helps a little bit. I'm not trying to be vague. we are just so preliminary right now. It's hard to know what the timeframe will be.
The next question here is related to the design standards. For this study, it says we have standards for the Mulberry extension or any other roads like Cedar Grove going to be improved to the same standards.
I'm not familiar with any of the Cedar Grove projects, but I think Sarah is going to, if it falls within the Henlopen and TID, there would be something on in that study for her to speak.
Yep, I can answer that. So basically almost all of the roads within the TID are planned for upgrading to local road standards based on their functional classification. So that includes with existing Mulberry Knoll Road, upgrading that to 11-foot travel lanes and 5-foot shoulders, Cedar Grove, also Robinsonville Road, and Beaver Dam Road as well. Jen, are you able to post links to the folks so that way they have direct links to websites?
Yep, I have been doing it under specific questions.
Because on our DELDOT website under programs and then transportation improvement districts, the Henlopen TID information is on the TIDs and operations section, and all the concept plans are available there for all the roadway improvements within the TID.
Okay, we have.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. It looks like there's a few questions coming up here related to potential impacts. There's a specific question about do any of the projected routes bisect the Welch's Pond, which is part of a yet unbuilt shell community on Cedar Grove Road.
I apologize. I am providing the link in the website right now for
I can, since our project does end at Cedar Grove Road, we would not be, if that development is to the south of Cedar Grove or to this area, we would not be impacting it.
And another question related to impacts. I saw just, I guess it was related to impacts to Gossley Creek. If we could talk about any and the downstream Gossley Mill Pond, its tributaries and wildlife.
So I think the Gosling Creek reference is to the residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a Gossley Creek and Gosling Creek, which is the development that I believe is towards the south side of Robinsonville.
Here.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I think they're just referencing.
Patrick asks about Gossley Mill Pond, its tributaries and the wildlife.
Okay, so we're not, are we referring to Rita's question?
No. There's a different question for the creek. Here it is.
Okay.
By Patrick. So Patrick, that type of study is part of the NEPA process as well. And again, that takes it to the higher level. We were on a call with some of the federal partners that we have regarding kind of the things that they were concerned about, and Gossley Creek was definitely one of them that was identified. So again, stay tuned. We're still very preliminary to even those considerations right now. We are just looking at just the very initial concepts that we're able to come up with to kind of hand off for further environmental studies and assessments.
Yeah, I think we're trying to answer questions as best we can as they come in, but some of them are sort of along the same theme. So also trying to keep them thematic a little bit. I guess I think looks like there's some other questions related to making charts available. I think we mentioned that those would be available online. Ron says that assume DelDOT is aware of the current ongoing housing projects along Cedar Grove and the increase in traffic on Mulberry Road that will occur, making a left or right on the Route 24 from Mulberry is almost impossible, particularly during the summer. Does the current Route 24 improvements at Mulberry take this into consideration? I think we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier.
Yes,
Yep, and
correct.
I did post the links to the 24 projects under Mr. Attenberger's questions. So if you are online, you should be able to see the answered questions. And if you do not, my email address is Jennifer, Jennifer .Sinelli, as you see it under my photo, CINELLI @delaware.gov. You can also email it to dotpublic@delaware.gov. And I'm more than happy to provide you as many links to the different workshops and the different boards that are available for the 24 project. That's been going on for quite some time. As I said, the first phase of that 24 project, which was right SR1 to Mulberry Knoll, should be wrapping up construction shortly.
We have a few questions here that have kind of risen to the top related to the intersection concepts that we're looking at. Jim T asks, when will traffic light be installed at Mulberry and John J. Williams?
Again, Jim, I will type the links for the SR24 project to you in my response. And then Mr. Weller, I apologize. I'm not sure if we did mention it. Plantation Road Phase 2 is on hold while Mulberry Knoll is under consideration. It's something that everyone, the 5 Points Working Group, which includes elected officials, business leaders, and residents in the area, and we've been doing that study for 4 years now, was one of their priorities of their recommendations for us to look at Mulberry Knoll versus spending the amount of money it would cost to do Phase 2 of Plantation. They're hoping that this would be kind of alleviate that need for quite some time.
Another intersection question: how many traffic lights are projected to be installed between Route 9 and Route 24 along whichever route is selected?
Yep, so I can answer that. So as part of the Henlopen TID, we identified the need for a traffic signal at Route 9. Then there's already one going to be installed at Route 24. And then we also identified a signal for Beaver Dam Road. And then Cedar Grove Road and Robinsonville Road, those are proposed for roundabouts. But again, we would get public comments on all of this before we move into project design once these improvements are in our capital transportation program. Regarding a roundabout, there's a question about when a roundabout goes in, who pays for it. So if it's part of the TID, then basically the TID would fund that improvement. If it's just for developer entrance, then normally they would be required to build that and fund that themselves if it's not identified as one of the needed improvements in the TID.
Yeah, we have another question here related to, I guess, the larger traffic considerations in the area. Phase 1 of Plantation Road appears to dump traffic onto Beaver Dam Road. What will the impact to Beaver Dam be traffic wise?
So again, I'm seeing a lot of questions that are addressing other road segments in this area. And I apologize because we still have 26 questions open and we have people with their hands raised on the phone. We are going to have to specifically address this study and this project. Again, if you need more information about other road segments in the area, so Beaver Dam, Plantation, any of those, please email me, jennifer.sinelli@delaware.gov, or our public relations department. We can connect you with the project engineers we can give you the project websites and talk to you more about those roads and those segments. But I don't want to run out of time and not have everyone who's asking questions about this specific study to be able to get in on that, because we went from a couple hands raised to now 4. So
Jen, should we maybe let some of the folks with their hands raised? I think that
yeah,
we can.
If that's okay, if we can move to the phones for a couple questions, that would be great. Thanks, Caleb. So I can do that. So whoever has the phone number ending in 8624, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Okay, well, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, thanks for answering my question about who pays for the roundabouts. Now, the land that's acquired on those, are they typically put on the developing property, or do they condemn around the area there and take other people's land as well?
My understanding is that we work with property owners and any developers that are coming in to do what's kind of least impactful to existing property. So, or existing homes, I should say, or existing commercial entities. So if Sarah can clarify that maybe a little bit more, or Todd, I would appreciate
Okay,
that.
what I got from what you said earlier is the state pays for the circles.
Oh,
There's
so
really no cost. The TID pays for it. Who pays for the TID?
Yeah, so like for example, the roundabout shown there, like at Robinsonville Road, and this extension would be done as part of the TID. So basically the TID would pay for it, or we could have the developer do
Is that
it,
a state? Is that
but then they would get credit for it for their TID fee. So for the Henlopen TID, the developer fees are expected to contribute about 23% of the cost of the development. So the rest of that is DELDOT funding.
Okay, thank you.
okay, and then we also have Tom with his hand raised. Tom, I'm going to allow you to talk and ask you to unmute.
Thank you. Am I coming through?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Having lived long enough to see what we used to call traffic circles and now roundabouts being converted away from traffic circles and roundabouts, what is the rationale for the rise of use of them, especially if we're trying to move traffic, like in a summer situation down the road? Doesn't that slow things down?
Well, roundabouts are considered an effective alternative to a traffic signal in many instances where you have a situation where the 4 legs of the intersection have similar traffic volumes, so that there's a relatively reasonable balance of traffic volumes. And they do have a rather significant benefit as it pertains to safety, because you eliminate the potential for your higher speed angle crashes that typically result in much more severe injuries and potential fatalities. So you eliminate the potential for red light running, you eliminate the potential for high speed impacts, and you provide an efficient way for those balanced volumes to get through that intersection without the conflict points that you might see at a more typical 4-leg intersection. The other idea is that it's done such that the vehicles are in a yield condition to the pattern of traffic that's going through at that time. Now, if you're in a highly congested period, you're likely to see increased delays as you would if you had a traffic signal there. So, it's not a perfect solution, but it's certainly one that is proven to be acceptable and efficient at safely allowing traffic to proceed through an intersection. So this is definitely, I think, one clarification I'd like to make is a roundabout is not although it is a round in shape and nature, it is not a traffic circle. So some of the more traditional traffic circles that you may have experienced driving through, some surrounding states like New Jersey, the roundabout's really designed to provide a smaller inscribed diameter and more direct and efficient route through the intersection.
Can I ask a follow-up or a second part of the question? Has to do with the communities that are coming up along Mulberry Knoll. It's difficult now in the summer to get out and make a left-hand turn, or to get into the community if you're making a left-hand turn. How are you going to, if you increase the traffic on Mulberry Knoll, as you know, to benefit Plantations Road, how are you going to help to alleviate that issue?
So the idea with the connection is that we'd be providing adequate transportation infrastructure to accommodate that traffic in a safe manner. So we wouldn't design an upgraded road to connect to a non-upgraded road and potentially cause potential safety issues at an existing situation where congestion is a problem. So we would evaluate those impacts on the adjoining intersections to ensure that those improvements are made. I think Jennifer alluded to earlier, there is an active project at 24 in Mulberry Knoll where improvements are already being made. So that's not to say that you're not going to still experience seasonal congestion, especially in the summertime. It's not going to eliminate that. It's just providing another outlet for that north-south route for local as well as regional traffic.
I think Jen, you had mentioned earlier, we're trying to keep the conversation focused on the concepts that were considered. There are a number of questions coming in related to the Route 24 intersection. We do have one related to the corridor I see that asks, will the proposed roads have bike lanes, including adding to existing Mulberry Knoll and Cedar Grove roads? Currently, it's quite dangerous for bikers and there are no bike lanes or shoulders.
Sure. So Delaware follows the complete streets. And so we do identify shared use path. And I know from participating in our plus reviews, we have been able to work with developments as they are coming online to ensure that they are putting in shared use paths as well along these roads so that we can have safer bike pedestrian movement through the area.
Yep, sidewalk or shared use paths and shoulders were identified for all of the roadways within the Henlopen TID. And so the fee that the developers are paying for future development goes towards improvements that include bicycle and pedestrian facilities along the roadways.
And Sarah, there's another TID related question here that asks when the 2045 forecasts were done and if land preserve and agriculture was considered.
Yes, so the 2045 land use forecast was done in 2018 based on 2017 counts. And so DELDOT will be starting an update next calendar year, 2022, to work with the county to determine any changes in the land use based on what was forecasted versus what's actually coming in, and then update the modeling accordingly. So we'll be starting that soon with traffic counts in early 2022 in order to update that.
Great. I want to make sure I'm not missing anyone. It looks like Ray Attenberger has a question here. If there's no road improvement between Cedar Grove Road and Route 24, and can you at least have turn lane into Four Seasons at Belterra? I guess that's more related to the Route 24 improvements as we've been discussing before.
No, where he's talking about, I believe, is on Mulberry Knoll. So it's the existing segment of Mulberry Knoll that Sarah spoke to regarding improvements.
I think that's down just south of our identified study area.
Yeah. So, Mr. Attenberger, please email me or our public relations office. We will get someone to talk to you about that as well. I don't think they've completed construction, and I think that development has agreed to certain improvements along that segment.
I think we talked about it a little bit before. Is there anything else we might add about how concepts A, B, and C would affect Gosling Mill Pond and the tributaries?
Again, we are still way behind that process, which is going to be part of the NEPA process, the full NEPA process that our environmental studies group will do. They will definitely be looking at those impacts. There was also somebody, Mr. Rowe, I believe, asked a question about the bridge with boating. And so again, those types of things, while we've notified our bridge section that we're doing this preliminary work, they will be part of the kind of final study and assessments that are needed prior to any design beginning on this project.
Thank you, Jen. And I guess kind of a design related question here we have from James Labella. What type of intersection would be at Route 23 in the proposed Mulberry extension? I think we might have that up on the screen now.
Beaver Dam Road. So again, just to reiterate what Sarah has already said, we will kind of, as this gets further along in the process and determinations for traffic management need to be made, there will be a public process for that. I believe that's what Sarah had referenced. We just know that there will be some type of management, traffic management at that intersection. It's slated right now, I believe, to be a signal. But again, as the conditions change in the area, we will definitely adapt with that.
And another design related question, Todd, you sort of mentioned this earlier, but will this road have central water and sewer and drainage ponds?
Yes, so we will have to convey any roadway runoff within the right of way that's generated by this project. We'll also have to provide both quantity and quality stormwater treatment in accordance with DNREC regulations, which basically means any proposed improvements and increase in what we call impervious area or pavement surface would need to be treated such that it did not increase the ultimate drainage downstream of the outfalls for that section of road before in pre-build and post-construction conditions. In most cases, we would look for our low points and natural outfalls to feed our drainage to a stormwater facility, whether that be a linear facility like an infiltration ditch or an infiltration pond. Most of the time in Sussex County, our first option is to provide infiltration because the soils are more accepting of that. But yes, there will be a drainage system to convey all of that runoff and treat that runoff before it's discharged into the surrounding outfalls.
I see a question here about the concepts that we looked at, and Ariana Sala asks, is there a way to build an alternate road that will utilize the new developments and not existing developments?
So I think that's kind of part of what we're considering with the TID, in conjunction with the TID and incoming developments. We would be looking at working with the newer developments as they come online, which is why we're trying to get ahead of this. As you can see, most of these concepts are going through open land. And it's not because we want to come and take people's land, it's because we understand that land is selling rapidly in this area and that developments are coming in just as rapidly. So we have to be prepared and ready for kind of that to be working through as they come online.
And since we have this concept up, maybe we can also talk about this other question that Brian Joseph has on behalf of Mr. Kevin Cross. Why can't the road run through the common property of Bridle Ridge instead of the cross property? I guess that's sort of what we're showing here with concept A.
Right, I believe this is the common property. So we did our best to try to avoid the cross property. We can show you, I can run through the concepts again. So this is we tried to straighten this out a bit, but you end up on the second cross property. And then concept C, we tried to avoid it altogether, but unfortunately that now takes us through the Ag Preservation District. So unfortunately, there's a really tight area here between existing residences here. So we were trying to weave through as best we can to try to minimize residential impacts.
And I believe when we looked at the Broad Ridge development, I believe there's a stormwater facility that is existing at the front of their development.
Right, this is designated as stormwater. It doesn't look like to be a pond. It's just a grassy area.
It's basically a dry pond. So
Correct.
when you have a heavier rainfall event, you'll likely see some water collecting in there. But it'll typically infiltrate at a rate that, maintains a dry condition during most storms.
And real quick, Caleb, while we're on Mr. Joseph's question, he had another one as well from Kevin Cross. So Mr. Cross, when is this construction slated to begin? We have no timeline for any construction to begin. Again, we are still behind the NEPA process being accomplished, and that takes quite some time to get NEPA approval. Even once we receive that, then we are in need of funding for this to move forward, and also the design process to even start. So I just need you to understand. That's why I was trying to explain kind of the CTP funding starts in the out years for newly added projects. And this has been a newly added project to the FY23 CTP, which puts design, which means they just start looking at and doing kind of update studies for the area in possibly 27, 28 would be where that funding mechanism starts. It could be another 5 years for construction to even be considered. So I don't want anybody to panic. 27 could potentially be just the beginning of this process for developing a project on the ground.
And Jen, I know there's several other questions in here related to the schedule, but I guess Tony D asks about this outcome of this study and if it would delay Plantation Road Phase 1 project. And then also, I think we've talked about this before, but is the rotary, I guess, roundabout at Beaver Dam / Plantation still planned to be a 2-lane circle?
Phase 1 is moving forward. And Todd, please speak to the roundabout that's going for Beaver Dam and Plantation, if you could.
Sure. So Plantation Road Advanced Utility construction is expected to begin in early 2022, and construction would likely begin in the late spring, early summer of 2022. The proposed roundabout is still the same. It's a multi-lane roundabout that is also shown on the project website. So we can provide you a link to that, but that concept has not changed.
Great, thanks, Todd. I just want to also point out real quick. So it seems that some of you have not been following our 5 points transportation study. If you have not, there are some good things that are coming out soon. One of the benefits of having the Plantation Phase 1 getting ready to come online for construction is that DelDOT is working with Lowe's and to try to mitigate some of the impacts to their entrances. So stay tuned for that. Again, another reason to email me so that I can add you to the updates list for the 5 points transportation study. We include all that information during the months that we do not meet. We meet quarterly during the year.
And Jen, it looks like we've had the phone number that's on has had their hand raised for a little while. Maybe we could address that, but I also see the same phone number has a question here. So if we want to maybe try and tackle that first, and then if there's any additional follow-up, we could.
Sure, there's also another hand raised. So let's do the raised hands.
Okay. So I guess the phone number ending 8624 asks, I think.
Okay, I'm sorry. I should have put my name is Ken. If you want that for future reference. Could the extension, instead of like designing a brand new road, have you considered like using existing roads and maybe widening them? Or is there so many historic properties that that's precluded from happening? Because I mean, you're talking about connecting with Route 9 here, which is also like a major route in from like DC and Maryland area. So I mean, there's a potential to get lots of traffic going down these roads. You know, and we've got existing roads. Can we widen them and, you know, make the flow a little better on those rather than building a new road through farmland that we really need to keep in Sussex County?
So one of the county's priorities that they've identified to DelDOT is adding new roads in this area. It is not feasible to use existing roads. And in fact, just doing some traveling recently myself in this area, kind of found myself turned around with construction and detours that are up for, because now that summer's over, we're doing quite a bit of road work, plus the developments that are coming in online, plus the sewers that's being installed by county. So again, I think we've looked at other options in regards to widening current roads. Plantation Phase 2 would be one of those options. But again, adding this new segment would be significantly cheaper to the taxpayers of Sussex County and Delaware. So that's why we've decided to.
You think maybe at this juncture, it's smart to slow the development? I mean, we've got roads that aren't already complying with like what your study is showing that they're failing.
Understood. We have no control over land use. We are one of the few states in the nation where land use lies with the county. We are only in control of the roads.
Okay.
Thank you. Did I see another hand? Is that not raised any longer?
I think it looks like there's no more hands raised.
Okay.
I'm kind of just trying to sift through, make sure we haven't missed anything. So again, some of the themes we've already talked about related to the schedule and other projects in the area. I do see one, Sarah, I guess, related. I did see one related to the TID, if you'll just bear with me for a second. Asking, James Labella asks why the developer contribution, is so low for the TID. It would make sense for developers to cover 100% or at least 50% of the cost, since developers make these changes necessary.
Yep, so of the, so the total costs for all the identified needed transportation improvements in the TID was about $285 million. And of that amount, about 95 million is already programmed in the previous CTP, Capital Transportation Program. So part of the reason why the fee is low is because some of those improvements are already needed. Not all of them are due only to future traffic. And then also not all of the traffic using the road is from development within the TID as well. So we have to consider background traffic and growth from outside of the TID as well. And then finally, one of the goals of the TID is to not discourage development within the TID in order to make sure that we're able to collect the fees that are necessary to make the needed improvements.
Thanks, Sarah. Just trying to look through and make sure that we've kind of addressed the themes here. We could go through each of the looks like we've got about 16 questions remaining. We could go through those, or
Yeah, you can go through them, Caleb.
Sure, yeah, I guess just for those questions remaining, we'll just kind of start from the top here. It looks like Tina and Russ again are asking when the traffic light lane extension will be completed at the intersection of Route 24 and Mulberry Knoll.
So anyone who's asked the 24 and Mulberry Knoll question, please just remain on the line. It's difficult for me because there's two different project websites. I will send you the links as soon as we're done answering all the other questions.
And we've kind of talked about the approximate time frame for construction. Juanita Holler asks about Ron Mazika asks, with almost every car has navigation feature, southbound traffic on Route 1 looks for back road shortcuts. Mulberry Road at Route 24 has backed up almost all the way to Cedar Grove. How will this link as a 2-lane road alleviate the current volume? I would believe that the 2 traffic studies would be needed to be done, one during the school year and one during the summer months. This link as a 2-lane road will be rapidly overwhelmed. So I guess the question is, will any of the 3 options better accommodate 4-lane length, I guess, to the existing Mulberry Knoll Road?
So any study that DelDOT performs, we always consider during the school year and during the seasonal months. We try to target a summer Saturday just to make sure we are capturing the correct volume for seasonal traffic. That being said, again, we are a very preliminary study. As this moves forward, more studies will be done. This is not the end all be all. This is literally just the jumping off point. We have a NEPA process to get through. And then again, once the design team is able to pick up down the road, they will do a kind of bring to date study probably. And if they see that there's drastic changes in the area, they'll do a full out re-study of the area and decide from that point forward what the best path will be, whether it be as Todd pointed out for Plantation, that's they're being considered, whether it be a 2-lane, 3-lane or 4-lane segment. So I don't want to take that off the table because there's too many factors in the coming years that could impact the style of road that's put in.
Just looking through, I think Todd, you had clarified this distinction earlier. I appreciate the distinction between Gosling Creek and Gosley Creek that we showed on the map. There's a Gosling Creek here that asks, where is Gosling Creek purchase on this map? I don't know that we have that specifically identified. We do show Gosley Creek, I guess, running through the study area.
So working on that now.
And then along the same lines, Andrew Campanelli asks, will there be any impact to stormwater at the Robinsonville Road intersection? And will there be a bridge installed over Gosley Creek?
Right, as I said before, we've reached out to our bridge team. They are well aware of our initial study and initial concepts. They will be working more hand in hand with, once the NEPA approval is done or the NEPA process has proceeded, they will work with our design team once that begins, and that'll lend to other public workshop options as this moves forward. I did see real quick, Caleb, I'm sorry, Ms. Siebert, I just wanted to let you know that we do not approve developments. That is a county obligation.
So the Gosling Creek development, I believe, is north of the ag preservation. I'm sorry, east of the ag preservation.
Here.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Thanks,
So my question would be, is there a difference between Gosling Creek neighborhood and the Gosling Creek Purchase neighborhood? I mean, are they 2 different? I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one. Sorry.
I'm sorry, who was that question from?
Gosling, an individual, Gosling Creek asked that question.
Oh, okay.
I guess we've got a question here related to the TID that perhaps Sarah, you might be able to tackle. Jean Marie Dolan asks, who runs the Henlopen TID and when did they meet?
Yep, so it is a partnership between DelDOT and Sussex County. And the TID was developed over the course of a few years And basically everything went before Sussex County Council before it was adopted. And then Sussex Planning and Zoning and DelDOT worked together to basically collect the fees, review developments to make sure that they're consistent with what was in the future land use forecast. And then DelDOT will be handling the updated traffic analysis in coordination with getting updated land use information from the county.
We have another question here, maybe for folks who may have joined late. Todd, perhaps you could speak again to Plantation Road. And Nancy Sickles asked what will be happening with Plantation Road in phase 2, specifically near Plantation East development.
That has not been determined. So we are still evaluating what that ultimate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're still evaluating what that ultimate typical section will be on Plantation Road phase 2, as well as the intersection at Plantations East and how that will accommodate the improvements on Plantation Road. So we do not have a conclusion on that yet.
I think Todd could also help address the next question about when will the circle be closed to Salt Marsh into Henlopen Landing to stop traffic from using Salt Marsh as a shortcut from Plantation and Beaver Dam?
Yes, so we've had many meetings with Henlopen Landing Civic Association to discuss this issue. Our intent is to work with the contractor once construction starts next year to identify maybe an early action item to close off Salt Marsh early in the phasing, so that that closure or that access can be closed from Beaver Dam prior to the completion of the roundabout. So we haven't set a date on that and exactly how that would happen. We anticipate Plantation Road phase 1 is going to take about 2 years to construct, but we have had many conversations with Henlopen Landing to identify a time frame when we can work with the roadway contractor to get that access at Beaver Dam and Salt Marsh closed off, which will ultimately be the final condition.
It appears we've got a question related to, I guess, the concept maps we were showing. Mr. Weller asked about the Nanticoke Indian tribe statistical area and mentions that that's shown on at least concept B, and asks what are these and how do they affect the potential design?
Let me show you on a different map. Not that one. It's a large area that they've identified. So the dotted area, I believe, is the green dotted area. So it's a very large area. So we put it on the map just so we're cognizant of it. But unfortunately, there's no way not to go through the identified properties. Basically what this means is a census term, and they've just identified a large percentage of Nanticoke Indians within this area. So we mark that so that we make sure that we can communicate with them when we go to the next step, or reach out to the community at some part.
I guess it looks like, just going through here. Apologies for reading and talking at the same time.
Wait, Caleb, I can, Ms. Dolan had a couple questions for me, so I
Okay.
just want to go ahead and answer those for her.
Great,
So
thanks,
Ms.
Jen.
Dolan, without looking at the CTP, I'm guessing at 27. I need to take a look at, and it's still a draft CTP. We have to get the final FHWA approval for that, which usually comes around February of next year. But I will take a look at that for you and find out for sure. So as far as expediting a project, Some of you that have been paying attention to what's happening with Sussex County, they have created a FAST Act program where they are able to determine that if a project within our CTP is something that is a higher priority for them, they will help fund the project to advance it. And the current one that they are funding is an intersection improvement, and it's actually advanced that project by 4 years, which was because it was a high safety issue at that intersection. So that potential is there. If that would be up to Sussex County to make that determination, and then we reimburse the county once we get federal funds to fund the project. So it is a way to advance it. So again, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I do want you to know that that can be something that is considered. And then time to have the new traffic volume studies. Right. So one of the things we were talking about last night during the 5 Points Transportation study meeting, the working group meeting, was that, and this was from Shantae Hastings, who's our Deputy Secretary and Chief Engineer. She pointed out that most of our really big impactful projects in this area are starting in 22 and running until about 25, 26. So we will have more than enough time to kind of reevaluate how traffic is moving through this area. Because as many of you have seen the Plantation Road Phase 1, it is going to be a big impact to the area and to how traffic kind of flows, especially through the 5 Points intersection. So stay tuned for all of that. I apologize. I wish I could have kind of a crystal ball and show you what it's going to look like once that happens, but we will make sure going forward that we reassess as each project is completed with the construction and comes online, so that we know what kind of impact it has actually made in this area.
Thank you, Jen. It looks like there another question just came in, Kim, related to the environmental constraints figure, and just asks if is there a more recent graphic for the environmental constraints? I don't know, Kim, if you want to speak to the data that we are showing or using here. This comment indicates that Outer Banks has been added recently.
And Outer Banks, in case everybody is not aware, is a new development that I believe is on Robinsonville Road. Is that correct?
We can, we did use the most recent aerials that are available, but for our next set of mapping, we can make sure that we identify any developments that can and add them, at least their outline and their name to the graphic. So we're clear of where all the developments are.
I think it looks like the remaining questions that we have are related to the Mulberry Knoll Route 24 intersection, with the exception of, I guess, Mr. Breyer's question. Just asks if we've considered where all the new southbound traffic on Mulberry Knoll will eventually funnel into. They'd have to turn left either at Cedar Grove or Route 24, and has that volume been looked at? I know we kind of talked about the traffic analysis early on in the presentation, but maybe since we're coming to the end of the questions here, if it'd be worth discussing that a little bit more again.
Right, so any study going forward is going to look at all of that information. We have development. I'm not just worried about the traffic traveling south on Mulberry Knoll. I'm also worried now about the traffic coming north due to the growth on the southern part of Mulberry Knoll Road. So just please understand we're very aware of all of the incoming development impacts to the roads in the area. And we will continue to do as many studies as we need to make sure that we're staying kind of up with what is happening in that area. You know, I usually share this with everyone. I grew up in the original pot nets. So you can imagine that things have changed drastically for what I used to know about this area. I remember when Plantation Road first came in over 30 years ago, and it was just a nice relief for all of us locals. And things have really changed with all the growth, but we're trying to get ahead of it. So we are doing everything we can. The 5 Points Working Group has been an amazing resource with their recommendations and kind of pointing us in the direction that they want to see us kind of address the concerns and safety issues that were occurring. We're starting to move forward with, like I said, a lot of those projects going to be coming. You're going to see so many barrels on the ground. You're going to be very angry at us, but stay with us. It's the next 5 years. Once we get through the construction of some of these projects, the improvements will be significant.
Thank you, Jen. And I think that answered Mr. Breyer's one question. He does have, it does look like there's another one, but this is sort of related to the Mulberry Knoll 24 intersections. It says that on summer weekends, the traffic backs up all the way beyond the state police barracks. And then Mrs. Sieber also asks if we went about the schedule for the Mulberry Knoll Route 24 intersection signals to be installed.
And I'm going to give them the name of the project manager for our SR24 project. He can better address that. John Gaines in our project development south section for DOT. He's the one running the show over there at 24. So I'm hoping he'd be able to give you more information. I have a feeling once that project, the SR24 project is actually completed and the intersections are improved, there's going to be a reassessment of kind of how the traffic patterns are changed or what's going to be happening there. So.
Jen, I checked the project website for that because the traffic signal at 24 at Mulberry Knoll is part of the phase 2 project, and it says construction to start in 2022. And so basically construction will be in 2022 and 2023.
Yep, so coming soon. And again, that makes sense because they would probably want to finish all of the improvements that they're doing along the 24 corridor prior to putting in kind of the final traffic management systems. So thanks, Sarah. Are there any other questions that we can answer? And again, I just want to reiterate that I have provided this presentation to our IT department. They are going to hopefully have it up soon on the Mulberry Knoll Study website.
Do we have any specific questions too about any of the concepts? I can walk through them, well, show them while we're waiting for more questions to come.
And Kim, do we want to just circle maybe through the 3
Sure.
while we're waiting? Thank you.
Okay, so concept A, once again, stays towards the western edge of the study area and cuts through here. Concept B lengthens the tangents. So we have a straighter roadway, but we have similar impacts on closer to the Ag Preservation District. And then concept C, we go towards the north side of this property, and then the north side of the Ag Preservation District. And then we cut across the Norwood-Jackson Agricultural Complex, which is identified as being a national, it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So we do need to go through coordination with the State Historic Preservation Officer to minimize impacts to the property. So we would coordinate how to best reduce the impacts, and then for the remaining impacts, we would develop mitigation measures in coordination with the SHPO. And I can, would you like to see the cross section, or have you seen that enough? The typical section. So just a reminder, the typical section has 2 11-foot travel lanes and a 5-foot shoulder on each side, which could accommodate advanced bicyclists, and then a buffer. And then we have a 10-foot shared use path for regular bicyclists and pedestrians.
And we're going to be on here till 6. If anybody thinks of anything, please feel free to put it in the Q&A or raise your hand to be unmuted. And Kim, we can just circle, like I said, just keep looping the different concepts. Just land on them for a few minutes at a time. Let people just kind of look at it, see if they have any other questions. Before more people drop off, I do want to say thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate everything that you have provided us with as far as your comments and your feedback, and helping us understand kind of what the concerns on the ground are.
I guess it does look like we have a couple more questions coming in from the participants here. Maybe we could start with the second one, and that Brenda Jones asked again about the typical section. Earlier it was mentioned that this would take away 92 feet, but per her calculations, it comes up with 112 feet, includes the 30-foot right of way. Who would own the right of way? Is this also an impact of the property owner?
So anything shown as right of way in the typical section or the plan view for the concept would be right of way that would need to be purchased by the department. So it would ultimately be owned and maintained. Anything within that right of way would be owned and maintained by the state.
Thanks, Todd. And Mr. Breyer asks, I guess, related to construction schedules, just in general, why does it take so long once construction starts on the Route 24 project? It seems there was a flurry of activity, then no one on site for weeks. If they worked every day, it seems that these constructions could be done sooner. Mr. Breyer asks if we could comment on the construction phase timeline determinations.
So when the project is designed before it goes to construction, the designers will typically develop what they call a critical path method schedule. So the designers will work to identify through the design what are the most important items to be constructed such that the contractor can continue to work throughout the duration. That's then included in the estimate and the timing for what we call maintenance of traffic plans, which is probably the most significant contributor to why construction takes longer. Essentially trying to maintain safe passage for existing traffic on existing roads, especially existing roads that are being widened or existing intersections that are being improved. It takes time because you have to be very careful to ensure that whatever construction's going adjacent to traveling vehicles is done in a safe manner. And unfortunately, there's not always a fast and efficient way to get that done. Ideally, if in a perfect world, we could close a road for 6 months and just go like gangbusters 24/7. We, in certain situations could get things done a little more quickly. But the reality is there's other factors like seasonal traffic that restricts contractors from being able to close travel lanes to do work. So in most cases, when you're doing work adjacent to an existing road, you would likely need to close the shoulder, if not the adjacent travel lane. So in order to do that work, especially during summer season, that would have to happen at night with a lane closure when traffic is typically reduced. But in order to work at night, you also need to have approvals from adjacent residents that are willing to accept the noise for the benefit of possibly finishing the construction sooner. So there's a lot of variables that go into the equation that determines the construction duration. And once they start working out there, there's always surprises that the contractor encounters. So, I can't say specifically why one project takes longer than another, but I can say that, one of the challenges and one of the important challenges is maintaining safe traffic adjacent to an existing road where construction is occurring.
And I guess, Kim, it looks like we have another question that came in on concept C. I don't know, maybe we want to pull that up, just asking why it veers to the north once it crosses Robinsonville Road and enters into the agricultural preservation district that we've identified. Why wouldn't there be a larger buffer area from the Gosling Creek development to the north, or I guess the east? And then there's a second part of the question asking whether or not DelDOT has ranked these concepts as to preference.
I can answer the second part first, is that we have not ranked the concepts. We're coming out to the public to help us identify whether we have missed something, if we should shift anything, and then what your thoughts are on each of the concepts. As far as sticking to the north, our goal was to minimize the impact to the agricultural preservation district. So if we went straight across through the middle of the district, that would cause more impacts. Our goal was to just come along the edge as best we could to minimize the impacts to the ag preservation.
Okay, and it looks like that's all the questions we have for now.
Yep. And again, thank you for your questions and feedback. We are slated to stay on until 6 p.m. So if you think of anything, we're just going to circle through the concepts and let you take another look. But thanks again for joining us tonight.
We have a new question.
It does look like we have a new question asking if there's any benefit, again, going through the agricultural preservation district as opposed to the two other concepts that avoid it.
So the three concepts that we presented, as Kim pointed out, were solely to get feedback on like what you all are seeing on the ground, what your concerns would be as far as going different routes and having other options. A NEPA process is going to require we have these kinds of options available, because we do have things that are going to be weighted differently in regards to the NEPA process. So again, this is not anything we have approval for, anything that we are concrete in. It's clear to us what the different impacts are and how they're going to be perceived by everyone who lives in this area. But FHWA sometimes looks at things very differently. So again, they might come up with something completely different as far as what we are allowed to do. So I just want everybody to understand that this is just very preliminary in trying to kind of identify where there are potential routes in this area. I hope that helps.
And to add on to that, we prepared this table which compares the initial concepts because we have worked with Federal Highways and EPA and US Army Corps before for NEPA projects. So we know what they're looking for. It's not always clear whether forest land is whether they desire less impact of forest land versus streams, but they do like to see the big picture. And if they will question if we chose something that is takes more relocations of properties and has greater wetland impacts and has cultural resource impacts. So there's a lot of items that we take into account. So they really just want us to be cognizant of all of the environmental impacts, and then we make an informed decision when choosing a concept. So that's why we put this table together. So at least we are thinking the same direction as we'll have to think when we get to the NEPA phase.
Hey, Cam, we can just probably go to the final slide in case anybody needs a link to the website and the email address, telephone numbers for our public relations office, and then also a mailing address if you still want to submit a written comment or feedback. And again, I know there was a lot of questions regarding the presentation being live. I have submitted it to our IT department. I will reach out to them tomorrow and hoping that they will have it up tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, so that you can take your time, take a look at this presentation again and submit any comments, additional comments you may have. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to hang out till 6 o'clock hour, but others may drop off. Okay, it is now 6 o'clock. We thank you again for joining us tonight. We hope you have found this public workshop information that we have provided helpful. Again, we will be making sure that the materials are posted online for the project or for the study's website. And the contact information is listed at the slide at the bottom. Again, my email address, jennifer.sinelli@delaware.gov. We wish you all a good night.